Randy. Today we are here speaking to our Jacobsburger fan base with Randy Reinhold, who is a diversity practitioner. And we have the very special benefit of having him here today to talk to us about all things equality, education, and summer camp. Randy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you. And hi, everybody who's watching.
Randy, tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up journeying from my hometown, New York City, to all the way out west in Colorado, New Yorkers, all the way in Colorado, and what you're currently doing in Colorado now.
Sure. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm a native New Yorker, born and raised. Never thought I would live anywhere but New York, to be honest. Met my partner who's from Indianapolis, Indiana, about 7 years ago now, a little more than 7 years ago. And she was living in New York City when we met, as was I. And, a few years into being together, she said, what do you think about the idea of, trying something else, going somewhere really different than this? And she's really into mountains and nature. She's an animal conservationist. So actually it was her work that took us out here. And so I wouldn't say she took me kicking and screaming, but I was kind of like, okay, we'll try it, knowing it doesn't have to be permanent. And so here we are 3 years later, we're still here. And, I'm finding myself challenged, and having, nature right outside my door has certainly been an awesome experience as well.
That's kind of a really cool experience to talk about, because I know that if you asked me to move to Colorado, I would probably have to go kicking and screaming. So I completely understand your pain. But talk to me a little bit about the work that you used to do in New York City. You were an educator here, and you're currently a director of diversity and inclusion in Colorado. So how has the shift in the education world been working in New York to working in Colorado?
Sure. I think it's important to, it's funny when I answer this question, because I've answered it before, as it was a large part of my life, is shifting a lot of my own culture in moving to this new place. And so I've had to kind of reckon with the fact that not everyone's experience in New York City is even the same. So I've had to do a lot of kind of soul searching and understanding that even though I was surrounded by so many different people in New York, that there were still ways in which I found communities that were very open-minded and very accepting. And so that definitely gave me the sense that an experience of being in New York City was one that was open and welcoming. And I know that that's not everyone's experience. So for me, I specifically chose communities in which I knew that my, identities, certain identities that I hold would be accepted, but that's not everyone's situation. And so because that was my situation, being in very welcome, inviting spaces in New York, moving out to Colorado, there was quite a culture shift for me, just in recognizing that most places in our country are not so insulatedly, if that's even a word, accepting and welcoming in that way. So I feel very lucky to have been part of the communities and the school, in particular the school communities that I worked at in New York. But I recognize that's not the norm across the country. And so out here, it's been a little bit of a challenge. There are certainly progressive mindsets and a lot of liberal minded folks who are open to this kind of work, but
we'll dive into that a little bit. Yeah. I introduced you as a diversity practitioner. Some of our watchers and listeners and interested parties might understand what that means, and some of them may not. So can you give a little bit of background about what a diversity practitioner does every day and seeks to educate the people that they work with on?
Absolutely. I know. And it makes it sound like a doctor or something, right? Like I'm going to put on a stethoscope and like practition someone. But yeah, I think it's a fancy term. It's funny because there are a lot of different ways that people hold that title, specifically in schools. So you might hear something like diversity, equity, inclusion coordinator, which is the title I have at my school. Sometimes it's just equity, any combination of those words. But basically what that means is, under that umbrella of diversity work or diversity practitioner, that person is kind of the person who is helping guide the institution, school, whatever kind of organization it might be, in their efforts to create a welcoming, inclusive, and equitable space. essentially, right? That's the goal. So that might involve anything from strategic planning, which is usually a big piece of it, and making sure that everything from policy all the way down to day-to-day practices feel inclusive and equitable for everyone involved.
I would imagine that given the culture of our country over the last couple of years, A, that this is sort of maybe an exploding area of work, but B, also a really challenging area of work that, you know, fosters a lot of discussion and conversation, not only in the education institution itself, but sort of in the community in which these schools or these parents or these children live. Is that a fair statement?
Definitely. And I think what's been kind of the continual, I guess, thing that I notice, for lack of a fancier word, is that the children are always way more open to talking about differences and identities. And it's usually the adults that feel more reticent or anxious. And I think that really kind of is a reflection on our culture as a country, and the things that we're kind of taught not to talk about. And I think that's something that adults still carry, even though, you know, we're in 2020 now, and a lot of the parents are of this new generation. I think that's starting to shift. I mean, that's been starting to shift over the last probably 20 years or so, but it's definitely become more and more explosive. I think that was the word you used, but yeah.
Would you say that, I mean, obviously here on the East Coast, we've been experiencing COVID and quarantine and lockdown pretty aggressively. How would you say that this kind of pandemic has impacted the work that you've been charged with doing and you know, kind of keeping that educational programming, for lack of a better term, in the schools going on a regular basis?
Yeah, so my honest answer is that, some of the affordances I have in my position is I get to meet with folks across the country that work in other independent schools. The school I work at is an independent school. And so we're able to collectively discuss all of these current events and how they're impacting our schools. And so as we hit that point in time where schools started to shut down, I want to say it was about mid-March, if I'm correct, schools were really shifting into like, how do we figure out Zoom? How do we figure out, you know, all these structures and formats online to make sure we can even still have our programming going. And unfortunately, in a lot of schools and cases, that focus on all of that stuff really brushed aside a lot of the diversity work, when those of us who work in this field in particular were able to see right away how much more this work was needed because of COVID and all of the things that already existed kind of underlying that just kind of became way more exacerbated because of COVID. And I'm like talking about things such as just recognizing who has more underlying health implications due to COVID, you know, who is more at risk for job loss because of COVID, things like that I was trying to continue to bring to the attention of our faculty, just to balance out, right? And kind of put things in perspective, because I think every school was like, oh my gosh, you know, what are we going to do, kind of thing.
Challenging just
like, okay, it could be worse. Yeah. So a lot of that was trying to figure out.
Up and running was right. A challenge, and continuing difficult conversations, I think, is even more. It gives we have pros and we have cons now, right? Because we have a virtual platform which allows us to reach a lot more people across a lot of different cultures, a lot of different spaces in the United States and different countries, but we also have a lot of isolation. And so there's challenges with you know, concerns with meeting the needs of everybody that you're supposed to be serving in your particular roles, whether you're a teacher, right, you're a parent, whether you're a diversity practitioner. We're having highs and lows. But it looks to me, from some of the work that I know that you've done, which I really want to talk about today, is that you found a really awesome, creative way to continue this diversity work, especially with students in the summer, because I know one of the challenges that parents have been facing is that there was a big fat question mark on summer camps, right, across the country. sleepaways have shut down, day camps may or may not be opening, the landscape looks a little different, but you have gotten very creative and you are offering virtual summer camps, right?
Yes. So yeah, I think just as you said, that period of confusion over whether camps would open or not, and to my understanding, when I started to design my program, which I've titled FACES, and that stands for Fostering Allyship, Community, and Exploration of Self. And so I decided, hey, why not just take what I already offer? How can I bring that opportunity to folks, even though we're not able to meet in person? And so the fact that camps, which I was scheduled to work at as an employee, right? The camps that I was scheduled to work at this summer were not designed in this way that I've created my programming. And so I just saw it as an opportunity. I said, well, if I'm not going to be doing that, this is really exciting because here's what I can do. I can create my own experience for folks. So yeah.
Now, FACES serves children designed to be from ages, it looks to me, 5 to 17, right? And they're broken up by age groups. So I see 5 to 8, 9 to 11, 12 to 14, and 15 to 17. Is that?
Exactly. Yeah. So basically what I decided was I would offer weekly sessions during the month of July, so starting next week. And I would go 1 week with each age group. So I focus those age groups on lower elementary, around 5 to 8 years old, upper elementary, 9 through 11, middle school, ages 12 through 14, and high school, 15 through 17. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the types of programming that you're offering for each of these. I mean, all the age
groups.
Really.
Yeah.
What purpose of FACES?
Sure. So when you go back to that anagram, is that the right word? Fostering allyship, community, and exploration of self. So I really started when I was designing it thinking, what's going to be that core thread of this experience? And I basically wanted to just make it an opportunity for kids of any age to just be able to talk about who they are. So at the core of it, it's really as simple as that. It's just, who am I? Like, what makes me who I am? And so that's what I titled the elementary programs. What makes us who we are. And so the focus of those is to explore similarities and differences, just get to know yourself and understand who you are. And also that who you are not only may, but will evolve throughout your lifetime. I think sometimes we get stuck on this idea that I'm just this, and now I have to be this thing. And we certainly evolve, all of us, in so many different ways, and just making
I think adults get stuck on that.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah, for sure. And then as the kids get older, because I really wanted to make sure it was age appropriate, which can be kind of a tricky term because sometimes folks really feel differently about what's age appropriate. But according to my values and beliefs, everything is age appropriate as long as you're able to design it in a way that you're speaking the language of that age of that child. So for the lower elementary, we're not necessarily going to be talking about being a co-conspirator or, racism to the deepest core, but we can explore those themes through talking about different forms of identity. We can certainly talk about race and what race is. I find that in schools, when teachers bring that up, I've witnessed teachers talk about race and kids don't seem to be exposed very much to it. It really depends, right, on the family and the kid, of course. But I've seen many a kid who doesn't even understand the idea that there are races or ethnicities or what the difference between those things are. So I really just want to provide space for them to get to understand and have some language for talking about their families, their interests, like the parts of them that make them the awesome person they are. So as they get older, I call the middle school program my intersectional self. So there, I think kids are of an age where they can start to understand a little bit more of the complexities around our identities and recognizing how those identities interplay with each other. And then looking at how the world reacts to us based on our identities. So getting a little more gritty with that and giving them a place to talk about some of the experiences they may have, such as microaggressions, which is when you experience kind of subtle discrimination, and giving them an outlet for talking about that and understanding that not everyone's experience is the same because we have so many different identities that make us who we are. And that goes into high school, thinking more about activism and what that looks like and how to do that responsibly.
These are difficult conversations that you're going to be having with the kids that are going to be enrolled in your summer camp, especially in the wake of what's gone on in this country with racism against Black individuals, the death of George Floyd. We just finished Pride Month, and while the Supreme Court has issued a various, number of landmark cases, which has really been supportive of the LGBTQ plus community, we're looking at a country divided again on a lot of different fronts. And have you seen pushback from parents or from people in your community or nationally about the type of work that you're trying to offer for these kids in the summer camp?
In a word, yes. Yes, there is always that pushback from some folks, and it gets tricky because those are the people that I feel most committed to embracing, right, and trying to keep in conversation. And so I think it's just about that. It's making sure there's an entry space for everyone to talk about things, and ultimately there are times where someone's just going to say, you know what, this diversity, equity, inclusion stuff is just not for me and my family. And, I and no one can make anyone explore these themes and understand the complexities that have to do with race and racism. But I just personally don't know how someone can avoid. I mean, we can, it's called privilege. We can avoid conversations about these things for as long as we possibly can. But at some point, your child is going to be exposed. And I just think, wouldn't you rather that be younger, when they can start to form an understanding of it before they get older and have to kind of realize, because I certainly feel that way myself. It wasn't until I was in my 20s and working in the first school where I was employed in New York that I started to realize that there were all these identities that I held and what that meant for me, or it explained a lot of why some of the experiences I had went the way that they did. And I took that as a inspiration to support other kids. And, basically my personal value statement and mission statement is help every kid that I come in contact with not have to grow up feeling like something's wrong with them because of any aspect of who they are.
Now, because this is a virtual summer camp, you have the opportunity to reach children and families across the nation or in a different country, and you have the opportunity to offer them a space to come to these week-long programs and engage in these type of dialogues. From a summer camp perspective, where a lot of this work could have been interactive if it was in person, but potentially solving or serving a smaller community, tell me how, let's say the chief cook and bottle washer and the creator of this program and the implementer and all that, how are you looking at the pros and cons of a virtual summer camp just from the practicality standpoint, and how are you convincing parents that virtual summer camp is good enough and they should send their kids, never mind the content of what you're offering?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think I can't, it would be silly to say that in person wouldn't be the most beneficial, because we all know that having a multisensory experience is really important for anybody, not just kids, right? How many adults here, raise your hand if you're like, I haven't seen another human being in weeks or whatever it was. So there's that. But I think that it also, having a virtual experience, I did this, I spent 2 months doing it with students at my school. They can be social on there. We did find that community building just looked a little bit different. So I think the perks are, kids that are sitting at home alone, particularly only children, single children, are going to get to see other kids that maybe their family is, everyone's experiencing this also differently. And there are certainly people who are more comfortable sending their kids to an in-person camp, and that's, go for it and do that. There are certain risks. There are also certain challenges to remote because, they're still sitting there and the parent may or may not have to help them on the computer. So I'm really trying to design an experience that has minimal parent assistance, especially for the younger kids. But I think that knowing that your kid is safe, right? Literally safe from any possible risks in person. And then they're interacting with other kids. They're getting to be creative. There are so many cool ways that we've discovered how to get creative with kids online on their virtual platform. I can sit with kids sometimes and they just want to draw, like they just want to annotate on the screen. I might have this whole different plan for them where we're going to do all these different things, and they really just and they're standing there and they're talking to each other and they're remote and they're going, hey, do that again, do that hard on the screen again. And they're enjoying themselves. So that's a big piece of it too, is just giving them the space to socialize with other kids in a safe way.
And I would also think that potentially the opportunity, because you're not just community based, because you can offer this nationally or internationally on a virtual platform, you may be having more diversity in your program than you might have had before, because you're getting to have different cultures, different languages, different areas of the, you know, the country.
Exactly. You're not just limited to your own classmates. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Very supportive of
exciting to think kids in New York or Colorado or who knows where else, maybe logging
by, you never know.
Yeah. And then you have a pen pal across the country too.
That would be really cool.
Yeah.
If that comes out of this program, you have to let us know, because it would be really awesome to talk about the pen pal program that you can offer once this is done.
Exactly.
I also know that you, besides the summer camp work that you're doing, I know that every parent is probably tuning in right now going, you know, whether it's FACES or whether it's another virtual summer camp, like what can I enroll my child in if I didn't feel comfortable sending them to an in-person camp? But I understand that you also put workshops together for us older kids. And you've been doing that work in person.
The over 18ers.
Yeah. But under an age that we don't want to talk about, right?
Right, yeah.
Which is the conversation we were having before we got online. We won't tell, we won't share. But what kind of workshops can you offer for those of us in the over 18 set that speak to some of the work that we can be doing to help support our kids while they're engaged in this type of diversity learning, and to begin conversations at home and to have these difficult conversations about gender and about sexual orientation and about race discrimination and about inclusion?
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking that. So we had talked a little bit before about most of the workshops I've done have been in person. I'm actually in the process of looking at how to design some remote ones as well. So look for that soon. But yeah, so I do workshops on cultural identity in general. So similar to what I talked about, just kind of an intro to what kind of identities make us who we are, adult version. Talking about gender identity development. I've done workshops on supporting LGBTQ students and what that looks like to be an ally to those students. What to look for in terms of signs of, you know, struggles that they may be having through that type of identity development, implicit bias, microaggressions, whiteness, identity and privilege. And I'm developing more work around intersectionality, because that's just becoming more and more at the forefront of this work in general.
Now, obviously, you know that we do family law. We focus on, you know, families that may have already have a fracture and have difficult conversations between parents. Tell me how, and I know, because we've discussed it, that you've had an opportunity, especially being an educator, to work with, you know, this type of diversity and inclusion and equality work with kids who may not have parents that are on the same page and may not be in an intact family and have these conversations in the same way at home or in their different homes. Give me some insight on the kind of work that you can do specifically with children of divorce or families who are separated or who have, you know, complex family structures that don't follow, you know, the same mold that you instructional conversation that a lot of traditional ways of having these conversations with kids will be taught to us as parents.
Yeah, so I kind of see children of divorce, myself included, as it adds a whole nother level or layer of experience and challenges to that person's life, not just them, but their whole family. And so I think just like with anything else, such as race or gender, it's just about establishing that, you know, any type of identity, any type of family structure has challenges, and that, you know, I want it to be transparent and broad, this understanding of family. And so I actually pulled a few statistics. 40 to 50% of married couples in the US divorce. That's half. So it's not so unusual, right? But yet like those other topics, we tend to not talk about them because we worry that the implications are going to be negative or something like that on the kids. And what that really does is causes guilt and shame around something that shouldn't cause guilt and shame, because look how normal it is. I don't love that word normal, right? But 25% of people over 18 have gone through a parent's divorce. So that's a quarter of the population. And 1 in 10 children will go through multiple divorces with their parents. So I'll just repeat, right? That those are normal experiences. Everyone's experience is normal. What is normal is a question I pose to kids and adults all the time. What do you mean by normal? There's so many different ways to exist. There's so many different ways to have your family, and we shouldn't have guilt or shame around any of that. So it's all about that. It's all about reading to them, talking to them, giving them space and the platform to talk to each other and be able, and to have kids. We did an activity at my school last year around families and family structure. And it was a whole school assembly, and kids were sharing about their family structure. And there were kids for the first time kind of like, your parents are divorced too? Or like, you have 2 moms, right? Or you don't have a dad at all? And that, just to see their face light up, because that's what it is, right? When we don't talk about something, we feel like we're the only one. And we hold that, and it feels scary and it feels yucky. And when we recognize that we're not the only one, that can open up joy, right? And excitement around having that commonality with other people, and that, oh, I'm normal too. And what is normal?
So if you have a child who's the product of separated parents, divorced parents, unmarried parents, multi-generational caregiving, complex family structure, and they're participating in this diversity work that you're doing, at school or in the community, and the parents don't agree on the type of conversation that they should be having with their child at home, or the way that they're educating their child, or whether their child should be educated at all. As a diversity practitioner, what advice can you give to the parents on, how to navigate this divide in their opinion, how to talk to their child or not talk to their child about these things from, the standpoint of education, but still navigating the difficulty in the parent relationship or the co-parenting relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the core of it, it's just about who is the kid, right? And who knows a child better than their parents do. So if parents are getting really honest with each other, whether they're together, separated, divorced, right? If they can have an honest conversation about, let's just think about so-and-so, right? And what do we know about our child's personality, what they need, what are they telling us, right? So many parents, I don't have human children, I have animal children, but I can tell you what they need just by the look on their face sometimes. And so that's an obvious human thing as well, right? You know what's going on, and how do you talk to your kids about anything, right? So I think it's about, if it's just noticing something or actually talking to your kid and saying, right? And sometimes I've seen parents of in divorce situations have to kind of coach their child, right? And say, if you really want to do this thing, whatever it is, whether it's take my summer program or go to a soccer camp or whatever it is, if you really want to do that, you have to let parent B, your other parent, see that and know that. Because I see that sometimes the dynamic is there's a more of an emotional connection with one parent, and then maybe there's a different kind of connection with the other parent, and certain things that you talk about or do, and just supporting them and saying, hey, like, if you really want this, or if it's younger, obviously saying, let's talk about this as a family, and just let that come organically out of the child. And I think that any parent can't say no to a kid who really needs and wants something.
So what I'm hearing from you is the answer is read your child and communicate, which is sort of the entire premise of what FACES is meant to offer on the specific topic, right? Let's have a dialogue. Let's introduce you to the topic. Let's communicate with you. Let's start integrating you into these ideas, or continue to integrate you in these ideas as you get older. And let's really spread that conversation so that we can start being comfortable with the topics that we're talking about. Is that a fair characterization?
It's fair to say. And some folks will say, the pushback will come and say, those are not appropriate topics to talk about, or why are you inundating my child with this information? And my answer to that is, the world will inundate your child with this information, because the world is made up of all different kinds of people. So when you say don't, you're saying all of that out there doesn't exist. So why shelter your child from the world? It's a beautiful place.
So Randy, you said that Faces is up and running as of next week, correct? So your first program for elementary school kids starts next week?
For lower elementary, you got it.
And they can go to your Facebook page, which is Step In, Step Up, Step Forward, correct?
Yes.
And you can find all of the links to register your kid for Faces Summer Camp there.
Yep. And they can also message me if they're confused about any of those links.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We are so happy to have you here today, Randy. Thank you so much for your time, for all of the information, for the work that you're doing for our children, and to teach those of us that are over 18, but not that much more, so over 18, about diversity. And I look forward to hearing about that pen pal situation. And I want to know who my pen pal is going to be.
We can be pen pals.
That's awesome. Let's do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.